Hey everyone, Aaron here from the A2Z Strength Show, and welcome to episode 4. Now, in this episode, I was very fortunate to interview Paul Roos, and for anyone outside of Australia or New Zealand, Paul Roos is a former AFL professional football player and also a AFL Premiership winning coach with the Sydney Swans. Now, he is very well regarded in his field, and he's done wonders with the two clubs that he worked with the Sydney Swans and also the Melbourne Demons. And there's so much talk around the way that he approaches players, the way he deals with players, the culture he creates within the team environments, and also what he does now in the civilian world, dealing with people in the corporate world and trying to get the best out of people. Now, I've known Paul for a while now. His son runs a business mentorship group, and my friend also runs that with his son Dylan, and I was on that with Paul. So I met Paul on that, and I was able to get a feel and an understanding of the way he approached his life, the way he sees things, and the way he tries to work and instill certain attributes in himself and the people that he works with and his family. And I thought he had a really good, awesome take on life, and I thought he'd be a great guy to get on here, and he didn't disappoint. We touched on a whole array of things: early life as a professional footballer, transitioning into coaching, things he learnt in coaching, being chucked in the deep end when it came to getting his first full-time gig as a head coach, the way he created culture, buy-in with players, the way he actually now takes all of these learnings into the real world, and then how can we actually use these key teachings to lead ourselves better and to have a more fulfilling and happy life. He's a really, really good person. I can't kind of say that enough. And just the information he chucked out there is so valuable, and I think we're going to have tons of takeaways from this, and I think it's going to impact you in many ways from this day forward. So definitely enjoyed the show. I definitely did, and it was one of the best ones I've done so far. Obviously, I can't do this show without your support, so for you guys to keep supporting me is, I guess, going to give me more of an ammo to be able to do what I want. It's going to get my wife off my back so I can keep doing this and doing what I love. So if you can support me, I would greatly appreciate it. So if you can go into my website, A2Zstrength.com, so www.2Z-strength.com, and you can see a whole bunch of things that I do on there. I do programs on there, I do online coaching, and I also have a newsletter that I pump out and provide some good quality content for people. So I'd highly suggest that you get involved in that, just so you can keep supporting me, and then also I can support you through that. So stay tuned, enjoy the show, and I'll see you on the other side. Thank you. All right, Rosie, thank you very much for coming on the show. I appreciate it massively.
Yeah, good on you. Good to see you. Thanks.
Yeah, it's been a while, hasn't it? I hope the sun in Hawaii is treating you well.
Yeah, it's not bad. A bit overcast today, but it's always good.
Slightly better than the winter in Melbourne, that's for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
The first question I wanted to ask, it's quite, I think it's quite interesting to hear what your thoughts on this is obviously you played AFL professionally and coached. At what age did you know that you wanted to be a AFL player? But then at what age did you know you could be?
Yeah, well, back when I was sort of growing up, I was born in 63. So back when I started playing sport, sort of 71, 72 as a 9, 10-year-old, you just played everything, and I played tennis. My mum and dad were big tennis players at the Donvale Tennis Club. We put in a basketball team at Donvale Primary School. So that was probably, I was a bit different to my other mates. They were cricketers, but I started playing basketball as a kid, and then football, everyone played, sort of thing. So you just basically did everything. And the other thing was there was a zone. So you're actually zoned to a team. So the point being, you never really necessarily made the decision. You sort of got invited down to Fitzroy. I got invited down as a 15-year-old. The city team played the country team. Yeah, I was quite a good basketball. I played in the state basketball team and a state football team. So probably the only decision I had to make was between football and basketball. But basketball back then wasn't anywhere near as big now. And as I said, football sort of drew you along because the nature of the VFL and how big it was and getting invited down. So in answer to your question, I probably never really decided until I had probably a pretty poor pre-season. My first senior pre-season game, I played really poorly, and I thought to myself, it's probably time now to be either serious about wanting to do it and knuckle down, or there's so many good players, you're going to waste some talent. So it's probably when I got to Fitzroy, when I finally decided, I really want to do this. I want to be a good player.
Did you come through the academy system, or was the draft back then? I'm not too sure on that when the draft came in.
Zoning. So Fitzroy, I lived in Doncaster, Donvale, and all the VFL clubs had a zone. So a city zone and a country zone. So I actually barracked for Carlton as a kid, but you knew wherever you lived, you would get invited. I mean, it's such a much better system than it is now. Like 60 or 70 kids get drafted Australia-wide. We're talking about 50 kids get invited down to 12 AFL clubs. Like 600 kids get access to a VFL club back then. And you drive down with your mates, you play on the weekend, you go back to school, on during the week. So it was a great system. So I just got invited down by Fitzroy and got asked to go down there and play. And then I played down to 19s, did pretty well, got a game in the seconds. And then I played my first senior game in 1982, just coming up through the under-19 system and seconds at the Fitzroy Footy Club.
And in terms of talent-wise, did you have a pretty good work ethic, or you had kind of the talent to kind of get you into the scene, and then you kind of built on that? Sorry. So how did you kind of get to where you are now, or the level you were? Sorry.
Yeah, I think most kids were pretty talented. So I think when all the kids were really talented junior players, and that's why they got invited down. So I was a very talented junior footballer. But then when you get down to Fitzroy, you realise there's a lot of talented kids. And then probably what you've got to decide pretty quickly is, do you want to work hard? Do you want to listen? Do you want to be coachable? What do you want to do, sort of thing? So then you make your decision around, I think I'm going to have to work a lot harder than, some of the other guys. And then, you get put in a pile with it. It's almost like, Darwin's theory of evolution, it's sort of like you sink or swim back then, because we were part-time, really. We trained in the afternoon, trained pre-season in the morning, went to school, work, university, whatever it was during the day. So then you'd come down to training and try and train as hard as you possibly could while you're there. The off-season was really important, trying to work hard in the off-season but training was brutally hard, and you just had to get through. And I think the other thing that probably you're able to, do then is if you're resilient and didn't get injuries, you really got a heads up on other players. Some players that were injured just fell away because the system didn't support injured players as much as it did now. So I was lucky I didn't get a lot of injuries when I first arrived, and I was able to train pretty much every session, train all the time, get my body in really good shape, and I didn't get a lot of injuries during my career as well. So that definitely helped.
Do you think playing in that era when there wasn't all the sports science and the tracking of everything, was that actually to your advantage back then, because you could kind of push yourself harder to build that resiliency to have that longevity? Or do you think there was just a sheer amount of numbers that if players got injured, there was always someone to kind of come in and prop things up?
Well, probably the main thing is they just didn't have time. So we had to go to the physio during the day, and then you book in and you sit there in the waiting room, go in, and then the doctors and physios would come to training, but training sort of started at 5 o'clock. So if you wanted to train, you might get a massage, you might get something. But I think if you're resilient naturally, if your body was pretty resilient, you did have an advantage because you didn't have time to get all the treatment. So certainly I think because I didn't get a lot of injuries and I was able to train hard, train long hours, make most sessions, do everything, I was able to improve. So the injury-prone players, which wasn't their own fault, it was just their body type fell away. And I think the really resilient players, the guys that were able to do most things, rose to the top. As I said, it was a bit like Darwin's theory of evolution. It was through no fault of the club, because the club tried to put in place as many resources as they could. But the reality is we just didn't have time, to do everything. So I think a player now that's less resilient and more injury prone has got more chance to play than probably what they did when I went through the system.
Did you do much on your own back outside of training, or was there not enough time to even do your own extra top-ups as such?
Yeah, probably when midweek was when everyone came down to the club, Fitzroy. But really, as I said, pre-season, you were training 3 mornings a week, going to work, and then training 4 nights and then Saturday morning. So there was a lot of time for extra stuff. Probably in the off season was more in the extra stuff, but you were training our training, even during the season. If I look at what players do now, we would train Monday nights, probably 2 hours. We'd train 2.5 hours on a Tuesday night, and we'd probably train an hour and a half on a Thursday night. Now, having coached recently, early in the week, players might do half an hour training and then maybe an hour 15. So they're doing an hour 45. We were doing, 2, 4.5, 5.5 hours of football training a week, plus weights before training, like literally get there and do your weights. So even though it was more condensed, players were doing way more training back then than what they are now.
And in terms of the progression from amateur to professional, how long was that kind of transition for AFL when you were part of that?
Yeah, well, I finished Fitzroy in 94 and I went up to Sydney in 95. So that was when it sort of transitioned probably into full-time around that time. That was probably the first time I didn't work. And as we got to the late 90s and early 2000s, it was pretty much full-time then. And then by the time I started coaching 202 midway through, all the players were full-time, all the coaches were full-time. So the transition probably took place the back end of 90s and then going into 2000.
Did you have high performance staff at the onset when it turned pro?
I'm trying to remember back. Yeah, we had sort of full-time fitness guys. When I first started coaching, with full-time physio, part-time doctor, full-time fitness guy, 3 full-time coaches. So along those lines, when I was playing, as I said, full-time physio, probably started, I think, Matty Cameron probably around mid-90s. He would have started as full-time. Doctors were never full-time at Sydney, nor at Melbourne when I was there. And then full-time fitness guys probably went from about 1 in the late 90s to the time I left Melbourne, probably 3 or 4 full-time fitness guys.
Was there a massive change to the Fitzroy club culture when it kind of moved from Melbourne to Sydney? Did kind of everything change with that?
Yeah, well, Fitzroy, I finished in 94, which was still part-time. So then when I went to Sydney, it's more now adding layers, dietitians and sports psychs and the ability to have perhaps an extra fitness guy, as we said, fitness, getting physio during the day, not afterwards. So, there was a big transition. And then when everyone became full-time, it was huge. Now you had to spend your whole day filling in your whole day, which was good, but it meant you could spread things out. Like as I said, I remember sessions at Fitzroy where we'd go 45 minutes weights, 45 minutes running, 45 minutes skills, a 2.5-hour session, starting at 5, ending at 7:30, and that was bait. So if your weights was your last session, you could barely lift up a weight. If you're running groups of 3 and we'd rotate it, fast forward to Sydney, pretty much a standalone weight session every time you did weights, have a break, do your fitness and footy together most times, but a lot more downtime, a lot more recovery, massage, physio, all those sorts of things spread out over a whole week.
Yeah, you can definitely understand when everything's so condensed and then you go professional and it turns into an 8-hour day. Like you think, like, what are we doing here? Surely we can kind of condense things down or do more. All this downtime kind of seems wasteful at times, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think meetings came into it a lot. That was a big part, like absolute game preparation. With Wolsey, my first coach, I mean, we probably had a meeting on a Thursday night and maybe a review meeting on a Sunday morning. So what you're talking about now, and you're talking in a full-time environment, is a Monday full, hour and a half meeting, break up into smaller groups, meetings with the smaller groups, individual meetings on a Tuesday, preview meetings on a Wednesday. So the preparation time for the game, was added, which was huge in terms of man hours. So the amount of meetings now that they have preparing for the technical side of the game just didn't happen when I was playing, really.
Yeah, I can imagine. Did you always have, I guess, the skill sets from a leadership point of view that kind of led you to being captain, or was that something that you saw that you wanted to work towards? How did that kind of evolve?
Yeah, it's probably the $1 million question, isn't it? I get asked a lot: are you born or you developed as leaders? It's probably a bit of both. I mean, I think I was captain of maybe one footy team growing up. I was captain of the state basketball team. But I was really lucky. I had great role models when I first came to Fitzroy that sort of showed me what leadership was. Leadership's about actions and doing, and I think probably wasn't until I became captain that I thought about what leadership is. And I thought how lucky I was, had really good role models. And then, you shape your own leadership, guidelines when you're playing. And then when you become coach, clearly you become a leader and you pull in a lot of things from your coaches, your players, your teammates. I worked as well from work, et cetera, et cetera. So you're pulling all these sorts of things in to become the leader that you want to be.
Had you always wanted to transition into coaching too, post-playing?
No, it was funny. I mean, I finished playing in 1998, went overseas for 10 months, lived in America and was really lucky. I did a lot of research, didn't know what I wanted to do. Came back in 2000, worked on the Olympics. I was working for C7 as a broadcaster and working part-time for the Swans. And then had an opportunity going into 2001. Cole Seary, who was the CEO, I think, or football manager at the time of the Swans, asked me to come back as a full-time assistant, which I took up that opportunity. And then I really was happy to sit as an assistant, build my skill set, see what it was like. And then all of a sudden, midway through 2002, Rodney resigned, So then I was asked about 2 days later if I'd coach the club. So it happened really, really quickly. And then it probably wasn't until that stage I decided, it was something I wanted to do. And then I coached for the next 10 weeks and then I had to put in for the job. And then I got the job full time for the next, my first contract was a 3-year contract. So it all happened in a blur really. And it probably wasn't until, because as I said, you're sort of sitting back trying to soak things in, trying to learn, learn from Rodney, learn from, the doctors, the physios, the fitness guys, players, shape your philosophies, et cetera, et cetera. And then next thing you know, Rodney's out and you've been asked to sort of coach. So, then in the space of sort of 2 days, you're sort of thinking, this could be the end of my coaching career in 10 weeks or the start. It's a pretty daunting task when you start like that.
Yeah, I was actually reading about that transition this morning. I was kind of, the mindset of going into that was, did you kind of think, shit, I'm out of my depth, or you kind of knew you had the ability to kind of step up to that level? Because I know it happened quite fast, didn't it?
Yeah, when I look back on it, it was an interesting time, but I think going from the assistant coach to a coach in season is probably the easiest coaching position you'll have because there's really no pressure. When I look back, there's no pressure because the club's in a bit of disarray. You're coming in, the players probably are sick of the previous coach through no fault of Rodney's. They were just, probably had enough of the coach. So there's a bit of a boost. You get 10 games. Probably the stress came at the end of the year when, they allegedly appointed another coach and then I had to apply for the job. And then when I got the job, that's really when the job starts. That 10 weeks is a bit of a mulligan in golf terms. You hit a couple of balls out of bounds, you play another one off the tee and you have a couple of pars, a couple of bogeys. And we did pretty well. We won 6 of our last 10 games. So it really started probably. It was good to have that experience of game day experience, there's no question. And it stood me in good stead. But when I look back on it there, it's probably it's your easiest 10 weeks of coaching that you're ever going to do, really.
What did you instill for that short period? Because what I was reading this morning, though, in terms of the club, the culture and the players, they absolutely loved what you did and kind of how you brought everyone together through that short period. And from what I understand, it was the players that drove you being head coach at the end of that, wasn't it?
Yeah, look, Rodney had done a lot of stuff that was really, really good. I mean, he sort of set the club up pretty well, but I think everyone was just tired at the end, including Rocket. I think he was just tired of coaching the team and the players had probably, just got sick of his voice, et cetera, et cetera. So in that regard, just having a new voice, whether it was me or whether it was John Longmire, who was assistant at the time, or I think it was Steve Malaxos, wouldn't have really mattered. So I think because of that, I just didn't want to change too much, really. I just said to the players, look, let's enjoy the next 10 weeks. You'll never get dragged for making a mistake. So I just had a couple of basic philosophies, really, going into the last 10 weeks. And I think it just showed that, that Rodney had done a good job with the team. They were pretty well prepared. We changed a few things, around the game plan, but didn't change a lot. And we won the 6 of the 10. It was probably at the end of the year where I had to really think about what the game plan was, what the culture, how we're going to redefine, what we're going to do, how we're going to move forward, and ultimately how we're going to win a premiership. But the players were great. They responded incredibly well. I'd played with a lot of them. They knew me well. They already respected me. We already had great relationships with the players. So that certainly helped as well.
Yeah, I could imagine. And did you always have like a passion for business too while you were coaching? Like when did you start to think, I could apply what I'm learning here into a business sense or into a corporate world?
Yeah, I guess it's just a result of learning over so many years. I mean, as I said, I was really fortunate through playing, had some role models. We also worked, so the ability to work and understand what the workplace is like and what culture is like, good and bad from a corporate point of view. Then to go into coaching and coach both Sydney and Melbourne, like the experiences I've had are just incredible. And then to see the difference between the corporate world and football, and to be able to apply some of the learnings from sport into the corporate world. So it really is just probably more of a natural transition into the company that I'm running now, Performance by Design, with my other 3 directors. It's really enjoyable. I guess it's probably trying to put an old head on young shoulders and just work with companies, work with leaders, work with exec teams, and try and, put the same principles in place that we really started with the Sydney Swans in 2003.
Why do you think the civilian world gravitate towards what happens in the sporting world in terms of bringing that stuff in to their environment? Why do you think it's so attractive for them?
Well, I think it's because it's so in-your-face sport. And regardless, I always say this to people if I'm doing a workshop or I'm doing a keynote, even if you don't follow sport, go and watch a really good team play. And you can see it on the ground. You can see what you want your company to look like. Everyone understanding their role, everyone playing their role, everyone supporting each other, the coach coming out, the leader, the CEO, whatever it is, coming out at quarter time or half time and giving really clear instructions of support and confidence, accountability. It's a really, really cool when you watch a really good team playing. And that's what every company strives to be able to do. Get good people, get clarity in their roles, have good leaders that support, empower, build a good system of reward and accountability. And really, when you look at a good sporting team, that's exactly what it is. There's some difference in terms of the exposure that sport gets. And I say this all the time. The immediacy of the change you've got to make in sport compared to the immediacy of corporate world can be different. But certainly, in my time in sport and now in business, there's a lot of similarities. There's no question.
Yeah, I could imagine. And in terms of the skill sets or traits that you wanted to bring out of your players, what were those kind of key things that you tried to drive within your coaching philosophy? Because I've heard many stories that you were able to create a really good culture. Players really bought into who you were first as a person, and then which I'd imagine would bring them out, would really kind of buy into what they were trying to do from a coaching philosophy as well.
I think firstly is for them to understand that they had to own it, along with the coaches. So I think that was the biggest change in football. That there's no longer going to be top down, the coach saying, do this, do this, do this, do this. And we had a group of players led by Stewie Maxfield who embraced that from day one. Okay, so we're going to create our culture. Yep, absolutely. We did it at Coffs Harbour over a couple of days. We created our culture code, the Bloods culture. We wrote it on our leadership group, which was really strong. Stewie Maxfield became captain. So that was probably the first thing, that get to the players that you will drive this environment. You will shape this environment along with the coaches. And probably I was just the foreman, really, just trying to manage the whole system, provide a really clear game plan. I think the coaches did that extremely well, both at Sydney and at Melbourne. Really, this is a game plan. These are the roles that you have to play within the game plan. And, these are the standards we've got to accept and drive of each other. And it was really clear. Absolutely, everyone was clear on what they had to do, when they had to do it, how they had to do it. And I think that was a really important part of Sydney winning the Premiership and Melbourne, the transition at Melbourne over the 3 years, and then what Simon's been able to do there to win a Premiership.
Was that kind of driven during training as well, in terms of it was a player-driven training? Like you would set the environment and then they would create the conditions to run the drill or run the intensity, or you would do that and then your assistant coaches would drive everything?
Yeah, well, it was a sort of combination. We would set training, but obviously the players drove the standards of training. I remember we did one time, we didn't actually turn up to training. It was quite funny. And I worded up the fitness guy, Dave Misson, is a good mate of mine. And we normally write training on the board, and it just said plenty of player involvement today. And we went down to Bronte Beach just for a coffee and sat around, and we worded Misso up, and then we went there afterwards and said, how'd it go? And he said, it's funny because the players were looking at the board, the coaches weren't here, they couldn't see the coaches. And then someone said, it says plenty of player involvement. I bet you the coaches don't turn up. Right, let's go, let's get out there. And that's probably how you'd love the system to work. If the coaches didn't turn up to training, how would training be? if the coaches didn't turn up at the game day, what would the game look like? Now, clearly, there's a huge role to play for coaches and assistant coaches. I'm not saying that that's not the case, but ultimately, if you can get the players to really drive it, the coaches to drive it collectively, and you get this collective buy-in from coaches and staff and players, it's incredibly powerful.
I think that's similar. I heard a story from Eddie Jones during one of the England World Cup campaigns that he did exactly the same thing. He told all of his staff that we're not going to go onto the field, and he just wanted to see which players drove the actual training to see if they actually did it, because he wanted to, I guess, instill a leadership group that took onus of training loads.
100%. And look, on the game day, Eddie Jones is not running around the field. I haven't seen him play rugby for a while, and Paul Roos isn't running around, playing for Melbourne or playing for the Swans. So the things that we were trying to do, and I'm sure it is the same, and is empower the players. Players have to make decisions on game day. They have to drive, even though we have runners in AFL and we can make moves and make changes at quarter time, half time, three-quarter time. If you watch the best teams, they do it in real time. They have conversations in real time. They give feedback in real time. They make things happen in real time. And that's our whole training program was built around that. Under pressure, what are you going to do? You're going to do your role, play your role. That's what we drive to do. And ultimately, we were able to achieve that in 2005, which was amazing.
Did you, I guess, from a coaching philosophy side of things, did you have a core, I guess, principles that you always worked on in terms of specific plays, like intensity of the game, I guess, like resiliency to defense? Did you kind of pride yourself on working on one particular area, or a combination of them?
Yeah, well, I think it was John Longmire. I did a bit of research before I took over as coach, and the research suggested that the only common denominator really Premiership teams was they're at the top 2 or 3 defensive teams in the competition, the AFL. And in world sport, that's probably pretty similar, to be honest. So when we talk about defense really to me, defense is an action that's not necessarily skill-based. Defense is intent. Anyone can run, anyone can tackle. Offense is talent-based. The NBA finals are on at the moment. Some guys can put the ball in a hole and some can't. Some guys can kick the ball in AFL and some can't. So I think that's why the best teams are generally the best defensive teams, because it's the mindset of the defense. And also, the quicker you defend, the quicker you get the ball back, and the quicker so my philosophy was based on that. Our game is the only game, one of the very few games where the game's in contest all the time. Rugby, you've either got the ball, the other team's got the ball. Rugby league's the same. Most games around the world, basketball, you've got the ball, you haven't got the ball. Our game's in constant state of 50-50. So the other thing, you have to win your own ball. You have to be able to beat your opponent either to the ball, when you get to the ball, in the air, on the ground. So contested ball was huge, and defense was huge. And then turning defense into offense really, really quickly. I had a basketball background, as I said. We wanted to be a real one-on-one, man-on-man defensive team. As soon as the opposition get the ball, you pick them up straight away, you defend them straight away, and we get the ball back straight away. So they were probably our main philosophies. There was a number of other stats that we had. We drove for our players, tackle percentage, uncontested possessions against, et cetera, and we just drilled it into our team over and over and over and over again. At Sydney, we sort of did all three together, offense, defense, and contested ball, and a lot of other areas of the game. Whereas at Melbourne, we had to build layers because they were a 2-win and 20-loss team. So we started with defense and contested ball, and then we built layers onto our game plan over the next 2 or 3 years. But we built standards. We were really clear on how we wanted the players to play. We showed them vision constantly, a lot of positive stuff, because we were building, trying to build a positive environment in what would have been a really tough time sort of thing. So, we had a really set way we wanted to play, and we wanted to deliver it to our players.
Did you model your coaching off your experience as a player, or off certain coaches as well? Or was it a combination?
Yeah, combination. Again, I was a big fan of Phil Jackson's, read a lot of his books, watched a lot of other sports. As I said, I went in 1999, I went and visited the Denver Broncos, Chicago Bears, Chicago Bulls, LA Lakers, San Francisco 49ers, San Diego Chargers. Had a really good look around. I'm married to an American. I spent a lot of time in America, watching games. Had a lot of mentors over the years. As I said, had a basketball background, really respectful of that game. So, you're sort of building up your knowledge, and Robert Walls, great coach, David Parkin, great coach. had some, Robert Shaw, all the coaches I had, you learned from Rodney Eade. I was lucky to sit in the box and see the way, he really manipulated the game plan and the opposition and was fantastic on game day. So, I was incredibly fortunate. The players I mentioned, I played with at Fitzroy and played with at Sydney, was awesome. So it's really a library of work that you've got in your brain. You try to put down on the piece of paper, and then you try and translate it to the players.
Did you, in terms of the way you looked at athletes, did you try and, I guess from my experience working in sport, we always had coaches that were either the team driven or individual driven. Did you really try and work individually with your athletes to get to know them before you started to coach them? Or did you try and just get them in their little units because you had such a big group?
No, 100% get to know them. I was really fortunate. It was a huge advantage playing with the players at Sydney, because it used to be really top down. And to be fair to the coaches, they didn't have a chance to build relationships. We'd get to train. Some blokes would arrive at train 4:45, put their gear on, and would be out training at 5. Wolsey was a school teacher, Parker was a lecturer. Then we'd finish training, you get your gear on, because you'd finish training at 7:30, 8 o'clock. You'd have to eat. So there's plenty more time. So the relationship piece in AFL football is transformed dramatically. So having played with the players at Sydney was really important. At Melbourne, the first thing I said to the assistant coaches, most of which I came with me at Sydney, get out of your office, build relationships with these Melbourne players. We're going to have some really, tough conversations with them. We're in it with them. They got to know that we care. They got to know that we're building relationships, and we've got to get to know the players. What drives each individual player? 100%. I think that's one of the things that we preach a lot of performance by design in the corporate world. Build better relationships, and then you can have really honest conversation on the back of those relationships.
Yeah, one of the quotes that I used to always kind of live by with my coaching was, athletes don't care about what you know until they know how much you care.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Because, again, it's a collective group of people trying to do something. It's not the coaches trying to do something and the players trying to do something else. It doesn't work like that. Fitness guys, medical staff, everyone. The great thing about when I look back at Sydney, there was no egos, and everyone was there, for the betterment of the club, the better for the team. Everyone was working together. If you did have someone that was ego driven, they were sort of ostracized really quickly. The same at Melbourne. We tried to get a group of people together that were selfless, that want to work closely together. So you're 100% right. Everyone cared for each other. Everyone wanted everyone to. There's another great quote. There's a rising tide lifts all boats. We've looked at the last couple of years, the amount of division in the country now, and the amount of hatred and the amount of people just that don't get on. I mean, it's just ridiculous where we're at. You want to build a high-performing sporting team or a high-performing, company. It's completely the opposite of what's been happening around the world over the last couple of years.
Why do you think the Swans culture, the setup was so different? And what I mean by that is that from my experience in rugby league, we used to always have the Sydney Swans as the pinnacle. We would always talk about in our training, we've heard that the Swans have done things this way, or they're using this as a metric to track. Why do you think you guys had the ability to really stand out? Was it because you were removed from Melbourne, or did you put a lot of resources in and around your systems to create that?
Yeah, I think we were the first one, really, when you look back on it, to go with the empowerment model. Certainly in AFL, I can talk to, and that was probably because it was so successful. And Stewie Maxfield was a good leader, and then we developed really good leaders, and then we won the Premiership after 3 years. I think we were looked at definitely as the benchmark, organisation in terms of turning it around, and winning a Premiership when we really had been 72 years. And then people started to look under the bonnet and started to ask questions and what actually are they doing? And when they looked under the bonnet, thankfully it was pretty impressive what they were seeing. As I said, our fitness staff, our medical staff, our CEO, our board, everything like that. There was a really good group of people that were running that organisation and running it collectively. And probably because we chose to do something different, we were courageous and did something different and brought the players in, and the players drove it. And to the players' credit, they took control of their organisation. And they challenged each other, they rewarded each other, and they had hard conversations and difficult conversations. We had a great coaching group that knew exactly how they wanted to play And despite pressure from external pressure, we continued to try and do that. We won a premiership. So, yeah, I think we're a courageous organisation which had really clear guidelines, clear standards, clear way we wanted to play. And we looked at it in the benchmark at that particular time.
I'd imagine too, with that kind of systems and procedures, you would have had a really low staff turnover.
Yeah, 100%. We had a lot of people that left. And if they did leave, they left for opportunity, and they left because they were poached, which is great, getting opportunities, other organisations, moving into the state, because we were in Sydney, as you said. So a lot of players, some players left to go elsewhere for different reasons, more family reasons. But again, it was a really close organisation. Really, everyone got on really, really well. And we fostered opportunity elsewhere and encouraged people to improve on their vocation and where they want to get to.
What I guess are your, being able to look back retrospectively now, what are your key takeaways from sport, whether player or coach, that you kind of live your life by now?
I think you just got to live your values. You live your doctrine. What I see now, there's a lot of people that talk about what they do or who they are, but not as many as walk it. Every action is a vote for the person you want to be. I think that's James Clear, Atomic Habits. If you haven't read, that's a great book.
But I started listening to that this morning.
Yeah. So he talks about every action is a vote for the person you want to be. And you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your systems, which is 100% right. So I think whether you're a player, whether you're a husband, a wife, a father, a mother, a brother, a CEO, a sales manager, you are what you do. You can't, I say this all the time, doing a lot of executive coaching, you can't say one thing and do another thing and expect people, you can't say I'm an honest leader and lie to people, because your actions tell you that you're a liar. You're not honest. You don't tell the truth. So I think that's what I see. People that live their doctrine and honestly have a set of values and live those values collectively makes it's extremely powerful. And that's what I saw with the Swans. They had a group of amazing players, great staff that did what they said they were going to do. This is what we stand for. This is who we are. And we're going to continue to challenge and reward each other on that.
Yeah, I think some big takeaways I always take away from my time in sport is the people's ability to handle pressure, whether that's as a group or on an individual. And the way that I think about it all the time is we used to kind of teach, and just with the drill setup or the way the mentality of the athletes were, is they would compartmentalize everything in their life, whether that was the game, whether there was an error that they've just caused, and the way that they would then approach that period on, like it would be like, say in rugby league, if they cause an error, it would be like next set, all we're going to focus on is the next set. Or instead of if we've lost 5 games in a row, who cares about where we are in the table? Let's just focus on today's training and just build from that. I think there's a lot of takeaways we can have with that mental process in our everyday life, and a lot of people in society should really kind of learn that skill of compartmentalizing, I believe.
I 100% agree. I mean, one of the biggest things I hear from corporates is, we're not present in meetings. And what you're talking about is being present. I think good sporting teams have an incredible capacity to be present. We introduced meditation. Tammy, my wife's a meditation teacher. We introduced it back in 2003, which was somewhat groundbreaking then.
Can I ask? Sorry, Rosie, in terms of how did you implement that, and what did you implement specifically?
Yeah, well, initially we didn't make it compulsory. Tammy's, a number of the players who knew Tammy inquired about it. So Tammy came down and worked with some of the younger guys, worked with some of the senior players. It was no coincidence our better players started to do it. Brett Kirk, Adam Good, Stu Bolton, Craig Bolton, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it's the ability, as you said, to be present. When we went to Melbourne, it was interesting because we had such a scarred team. And one of the things that we did meditation compulsory, and then we did visualization in my second or third year, and Tammy would come in and we'd visualize before the game, 2 hours before the game. And one of the things we talked about was reset, coming off the ground and reset, forgetting, because they weren't being really present at Melbourne. They were worried about what was happening. The body language was terrible when they made a mistake. Okay, so it's a really good point. Yeah, but I think great teams have the ability to be present. Are we training now? Yes, we're doing weights. Okay, let's do our weight session. This is a meeting now. We're having a defensive meeting. Let's be present. Too often in life or in business, we're checking our phone. We're worried about what's happening. Oh, the marketing meeting's going on now. I shouldn't be in this meeting, et cetera, et cetera. One of the biggest problems I see. But you're right. In sport, the ability to be present And in a game, you look at the teams, people mistakenly think the best teams don't make mistakes. That's not true. The best teams don't make quite as many mistakes, but the next player will cover up that mistake because he's remaining present, understands his role, and doesn't try and compound the first mistake with a second mistake by going outside his role. Then the person that made the mistake will then go, well, that's done. I've now got to do what I have to do in order to get the ball back, or in order to create the try, or to create a goal, et cetera, et cetera. So the ability to be present in a game of football or rugby or whatever it is incredibly important, isn't it?
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think I also think about some of the really good athletes that stand out to me are the ones that were able to handle failure. They knew they were going to fail, and then they were able to reframe that failure and not make it a negative story of, I made an error, I'm a shit player, this is my worst game, and kind of have that downward spiral from there, which is what we tend to have in the real world. But they would be able to make an error, not attach themselves to it, and then just move straight on. Like, that's a skill set that is unbelievable to possess. Yeah,
and again, I think it's the great players have the ability. Michael Jordan, I think what he said, he missed more game
8,000 shots or something. Yeah,
like than he's made or something like that. But his confidence in the ability, that's finished. But then I think the other thing on that is preparation. The preparation, the best players, in my view, are the best prepared. So if they do something wrong, they know how to correct it. They then go back, well, probably last week I didn't do my extra weights, or I didn't do my extra run, or I didn't do that meeting or whatever, or I did, and I just had a bad day. And so I'm going to go back to my preparation, the knowledge around the game plan, the preparation around getting your body right, training hard, and all those sorts of things. So great preparation leads to great performance. And then if we do have a bad game, we just go back to our preparation and we say, okay, well, I've just got to redo that, and I've got to keep doing that. I mean, the problem is it sounds, for some people, it's too simple. They want complicated. And that's what I find in the corporate world sometimes. The corporate world thrives on complicated.
Well, could they probably believe that what happens in sports so cutting edge, no one else thinks of it, but it is actually quite simple processes. It's
quite simple. And that's probably the thing that when we work at Performance by Design, probably the best compliments we get is, gee, this is quite simple. Yeah, it is. I'm a simple person. My business partners are simple, but the simpler the frameworks are, the simpler it is to follow, the more likely you are to do it. The more complicated it is. And I think the great sporting teams have really simple structures. They don't have too many team rules. They don't have, whether that be externally or internally or technical or whatever, they have really simple processes. They have simple review systems in place. They have simple previews of the teams. They try and take away 2 or 3 things of the opposition, but basically play the same way every week, with 1 or 2 little differences. The simpler, the better. It's just so much easier to follow. And I think that's the biggest thing when you look at performance. If it's simple, if I've done my preparation, I know what I've done well, then it gives me confidence going into the game.
Did you do lots of work with your players around failure, stress, pressure to give them the ability to handle those situations? Or is it just purely off the reps and just giving them the open environment to do that and fail without kind of abusing them, and then building their confidence up that way?
I think it's education. When I got to Melbourne, we'd won 2 and lost 20. So we had to do a lot of education. So educating them and saying, this is what I need from you. This is what the best teams do. Like you said before, the irony of your question before is when I got to Melbourne, I was showing Swans vision when we played the Swans, and I was still showing vision we played them in a game, I think my 5th or 6th game. They beat us convincingly, but we held them to 1 goal in the second quarter. I said, guys, this is the best team in the competition. We've held them to 1 goal in the quarter. Here's what we did. You technical, you have to show them what it looks like. And then from a standard and character point of view, really important. This is our culture code. This is what we need you to do. This is how we're going to pick. Too often, we reward players, or in corporate world, people for bad behavior. And I see it all the time. I still see it in the sport. We think.
What do you think that is?
Well, because we think talent wins games, and it does. But I talk about behavioural-based teams and talent-based teams. And clearly Craig Bellamy had a lot of talent, but outstanding individuals. Really high standards, really high behaviours. One of the great things was coaching Melbourne was getting to know Billy Slater and getting to know Cam Smith and Cooper Cronk and just walking them in the hallway. outstanding individuals. Yeah, do they have talent? Of course. If you can marry the talent and behaviour up, it's unbeatable. But I'd rather have a behavioural-based team than a talent-based team. Okay, does that make sense? Because talent-based teams, yeah, they can win it, but they're going to go down and up and down and up purely and simply based on their talent. Really bad behaviours, and over the test of time, it just doesn't work. A behavioural-based team, when they get their talent, they're basically can't be beaten, really. But when their talent drops off, they're still competitive because we know what role is, we know what our behaviours are, we know what our standards are, and we're really clear on driving that. So be a talent-based team, fine, that's okay. You're going to go up and down, whether that's a corporation, but a behavioural-based organisation, a behavioural-based team is where you want to get to.
So did you pick a lot of your players based around that? Because I know you, just correct me if I'm wrong with this, but I read this morning that you had quite a different philosophy with choosing players. You didn't go to draft players, you chose existing players.
Yeah, it's still one of the greatest opportunities, I think, in AFL in particular. Identifying high character guys from really good teams that probably aren't getting a game. Craig Bolton came in, from Brisbane Lions team, which is an exceptional team. He was emergency a number of times. We identified him as a player that came in and became an All-Australian and captain of the footy club. Joey Kennedy, came in from Hawthorn. Hawthorn had an unbelievable midfield, high character guy. Joey Kennedy will go down as top 10 Swans player of all time. So we identified those players extremely well. And I still believe it's an untapped resource for clubs in the AFL. High character guys from really good teams that just can't quite break into those really good teams that need a bit of a break, need some confidence. And we did it. Darren Jolly, Teddy Richards, Marty Mattner, Reece Shaw, over and over and over and over again. Benny McGlynn, Shane Mumford, et cetera. And really, the reason we reshaped it, John Longmire and I, was through the 2010 draft. I think it was in 2009, when we brought in 6 or 7 players who played in the Premiership for John Longmire in 2012. So in the space of 12 months, we really reshaped the list, which allowed John to continue that legacy and continue to coach and win a premiership in 2012. So there's certainly an opportunity if you get a cultural-based team, identify high IQ guys, high character guys from other teams that just can't quite get an opportunity, and bring them in your organisation.
Can I ask how you actually specifically targeted those players? Did you have people interviewing them, or you had I guess like insights to coaches who were coaching them, who would give you insights as to their personality? Would you give them personality tests? How would you come to that decision that player suited?
Yeah, I mean, most of the information is pretty readily available in AFL, particularly when they're older players. Younger players, it's harder when they're coming through the draft, but older players, you can get a really good gauge from talking to people, what they're like. Obviously, we scout them. The AFL system is, you get your recruiting department that goes and watches them consistently, talks to their friends, their family, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a really lot of work that goes into it. And as you can tell, if you get it right, you get a lot of reward for it. If you get it wrong, obviously there's a lot of downside to missing particularly early draft picks or trading an early draft pick for a player that doesn't work out. But it all gets back to the total system. Not one thing works without the other. You've got to have the whole system in place, and then if you do, it becomes really powerful.
Now, I've always said that to people in my circles, that the system is what brings premierships or the winners trophy, as opposed to having really good individuals. Because if you're, say, for example, for me, 5 years at one club, 4 head coaches in that time, 1 interim coach, 2 high performance managers, when you got that kind of inconsistency, it's so hard to build a system in that. And I was there because I wasn't on the chopping block in terms of how high I was up in the club. So I was after 5 years, I was the longest serving high performance staff guy. So that kind of just says how hard it was to create momentum, and it reflected on our positions. We were 9th 3 in a row, 10th, and then 9th again.
Because you can't build a system, you can't build consistencies. That's the problem. And the players lose trust in everyone. They lose faith in the staff. They lose faith in the club. And it becomes really, really difficult. Continuity. Now, you can't keep incompetent people, but that's why the hiring process is so important, and getting good people in your organisation and letting them do their job becomes fundamentally important. Building trust in an organisation is so important. And if you lose the trust, it takes a while to get back. We talk about the trust bank all the time, putting deposits in the trust bank. And if you take too many withdrawals, it becomes really difficult to become a high-performing team.
Yeah, trust. I've actually never heard it in that manner, but it makes perfect sense. Like when you've got that kind of inconsistency, or you feel like you're on the chopping block, or you may lose your contract at the end of the year, it's hard to fully be yourself and give yourself if you think that anything you say could be used against you, or you may not be there to be able to instill it in the following year. I can totally get that.
Yeah, and then players are smart. Players recognise everything that's going on around the footy club. You know, they know if the coach is not being trusted by the CEO or the footy manager or the board, and they know if the coach doesn't trust the captain or the coach doesn't trust the fitness guy or whatever. It's so obvious. Yeah, because players are watching every interaction. They're watching the interaction between, the coach and the fitness guy on, training sessions and game day, and then the doctor and the physio, and they understand it. So when you build trust, it just flows on. Everyone feels confident, everyone feels empowered, everyone does their job. And when you erode trust, it can be disastrous.
Did you find it hard to bring that trust at the start, especially say at the Demons when you went there, in terms of what they'd experienced, where they were from a team morale or from a success point of view? Did it take a while to build that, or because you brought a lot of success with you, they were just ready for the new information?
Well, the big thing was, which I probably would never have taken the job had I not trusted some of the people that were already there and been able to bring people. So there's two things. There's the players, the game plan, but it's also the people you bring in. Dave Misson was my fitness guy at Sydney. He was at Melbourne. I already trusted him. So having him there was important. I was able to bring coaches with me. All right, so they trusted me, I trusted them. That was incredibly important. It's too hard to do it the other way. You can't be building trust with your players and also with your staff as well. The majority of them, particularly assistant coaches, it just becomes too difficult as a senior coach. And then, so having done that, clearly I have to build some trust with the recruiting guys and the medical and fitness staff and the players. But most of it was ticked off, which was really important. Yeah, and then we had to build trust. We had to be really positive, set the system up, be really clear on the system, drive really high standards. Consistency is incredibly important, because as soon as you start going down one path and then hook to another path, players go, hang on, last week we're doing this, now we're doing that. And I think being a senior experienced coach was really important to the Melbourne Footy Club. Again, I wouldn't have taken the job had I been a first-time coach. It was just way, way too hard. So, it's hard enough as a Premiership coach and been coaching for 8.5 years, let alone a first-time coach. But I was able to know what the systems I wanted to put in place, have confidence in the staff that I brought in, confidence in Misso, confidence in Peter Jackson and Glenn Bartlett as the board and the CEO. Knew Todd Viney really well. Jason Taylor was a fantastic recruiting manager and built really good relationship with Josh Marnie, who I didn't know that well, but I knew of him. So it's, as you said, it's a whole system. If you think you're going to bring a coach in and fix your problems, you're wrong. If you think you bring a star player in, fix your problems, you're wrong. If you think you're going to bring the guru fitness coach in, fix your problems, you're wrong. If you think you're going to bring a new CEO in, fix your problems, you're wrong. Will they lead to fixing the problems if they understand the systems? 100%. But one person's not going to make a difference.
How did you deal with players or staff that didn't fit the behaviours that you were after? Did you cut them, or you tried to instill what you wanted and then bring them up to your level, or was it almost kind of too far too gone?
No, 100%. You're trying to support them. You're trying to give them guidelines. You're trying to help them. You're trying to get them up to speed. Absolutely. You want to give your players and your staff and everyone an opportunity to be part of the system. Create the system, and then they act the way in or they act the way out. And, depending on how long they've been there, clearly there's players that couldn't make it. Then eventually you've got to get rid of them. But you want to support them first. You want to be clear. You want to help them. You want them to be part of the system, and you want them to be involved. So help them. But at some point, if you know they're not going to get there, that's when you have to move them on.
And imagine too, when you raise that system, it's actually going to attract, once people get wind of that, it's going to attract staff and players to want to be a part of that system who are already at that level or even higher.
Yeah, I talk about culture travels. None of us, I've never spent any time inside the Melbourne Storm system. But I talk about the Melbourne Storm. We talk about the All Blacks. People talk about the Swans. Culture travels. Everyone understands they want to be part of a good culture. They don't necessarily know what it is, but it travels. So you're 100% right. the reason the Sydney Swans are still sustainable to this day, and obviously teams like Geelong and Hawthorn and Craig Bellamy and the All Blacks, everyone wants to be part of it. Managers hear about it. Players hear about it. Coaches hear about it. Administrators hear about it. How do I get in that system? And that continues to rise the level of that system.
The Storms are a fascinating one for me because they get absolute no-name players, and just the system brings them out into levels that no one's ever seen. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It is. And that's why, again, when people say, oh, they were lucky, or there's talent, or this, or it won't work in the corporate world, or, whatever the excuses are, that's why they're excuses. Because if you really drill down to the really good organisations, they come back to people and systems. What's the corporate world? What's a netball club, a footy club, a rugby club? They're systems and people. Everything's people and systems. It doesn't matter what your product is. Everything comes back to people and systems. Okay, so when you look at what Craig Bellamy's done, they've had some talent, but systems and people, great systems, great success. And I'll defy anyone to challenge that over a long period of time, because you can get some talent, you can defy it for a number of years, but if you want to be successful over many, many years, get great people, put great systems in, and have a great culture.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I've always thought that I've been in the relationship business, not the coaching business. And the reason why I thought that is because when I just finished uni in New Zealand, and my dad's best friend was a coach of a Super Rugby side. And I spent a week with them in an off season, and their head of strength and conditioning goes, you want to come and work in sport, don't you? And he goes, yeah. And I said, yes, sorry. And he goes, well, just go piss off and go be a personal trainer for a couple of years. And he goes, you need to learn how to deal with people. And if you can deal with a whole array of people in groups and small groups, whether they can move or whether they can't, and you can coach them, you can relate to them, then you'll be fine in here. And that literally stuck in my brain. And I actually went and did that. And it was a unbelievable kind of base to then go into sport with that knowledge that you could kind of work with any population, whether they were incredibly wealthy, whether they were poor, they couldn't move, whether they were male, female, small groups. And I've always thought ever since then that relationships is the key to literally everything we do, and the psychology around the relationships as well.
Yeah, well, look, probably one of the greatest compliments I ever received was a letter I got from Rob Jackson, who was one of our strength and conditioning coaches. And he wrote me a letter when I left Melbourne, and I asked him if I could put him in my book, and it was really complimentary. And basically what he said is, I've had a lot of coaches, when people ask me the difference, I always say they're all always the same. And he talked about myself. He said, what I realised with you, Roosie, is you coach from the heart. And that was the fundamental difference that changed the way that he coached people. And he said, and again, it gets back to your point, I think that was probably one of the greatest compliments I'd ever received, that it changed his whole philosophy around, he was very technical and very hard and very just do. And he talked about how I built such strong relationships with everyone at the footy club and with players and with him. And I just, coached through the heart, and that changed his philosophy on the way he went about his business, which was really incredibly complimentary, but exactly what you're talking about.
It's quite fascinating hearing that, because I guess for the general public out there, in terms of the hierarchy of a club, players tend to not like to go to the head coach because they tend to be intimidated. There tends to be a lot of, if I say something wrong, I may not get picked. So a lot of criticism. They may feel there could be a lot of criticism coming their way. So a lot of the players would come to, say, us in the high performance department or assistant coaches, and actually be really authentic. So to hear that they were able to do that with you, I think is a good testament to. I'd probably say that you were really authentic with who you are first to the players, as opposed to coaching them first.
Yeah, look, again, it was a huge compliment, because when you're coaching, to be honest, you don't get a lot of feedback. As a senior coach, and I talk about this to senior executives all the time, is just seek feedback, ask for feedback, get mentors. So you develop your philosophies, but I was really fortunate to have a really close group of, coaches coming, Benny Matthews, Daniel McPherson, Brett Allison, Georgie Stone, that came with me. But to get that feedback from someone that had been in the system, he'd been in rugby league, he'd been in AFL for a long period of time. So to get that feedback, because I think one of my philosophies was, be yourself, be authentic, create an environment for the players where they want to turn up, they want to come, they want to be the best version of themselves. And the leader has to create that environment in order for them to do that.
So were you very vulnerable to them to make them feel comfortable in terms of how you dealt with them at the start? Like, were you a good storyteller to get people to buy in, I guess, from like personal experience, who you were? It's just interesting how
myself, we had systems and they knew who I was, but I was able to have conversations with them, and we hopefully created a really good environment for players. And as I said, the relationship piece has become really big in AFL. I can talk to it. It's no longer the players versus the coaches or whatever. It's collectively together, having the conversations and being prepared to have your door open and the players coming in, and I'm having trouble at home. My wife's crook. Can I look after the kids tomorrow? Look, I'm going through some tough time at university or whatever. And me, my family came in the organisations. Tammy, as I said, worked at both Sydney and Melbourne. The boys were at the games and in the rooms after the game and came to training to watch training. So they knew who I was as a person. I think that really helps.
I think, hearing you say that, I think you could see why people would buy into that. If they knew who you were outside of footy, they could get a better understanding of why you do what you do in footy. Yeah,
absolutely. That definitely. And again, it's about what makes the person. I think, again, this old notion of the closed leader and, what is authentic leadership? What is vulnerability? We talk, I know Brene Brown talks a lot about psychological safety, and authenticity and things like that. Just be yourself, but you've got to set standards as well. And and I always talk about it's a fine line, building relationships, setting standards. Some days I spent all day building relationships. The next day it was, these standards aren't enough, guys. Leadership's not easy. Let's be really clear on it. It's difficult. There's days where you go home exhausted because you've had to set really clear standards. Guys, we're not doing this. The only way we can be a high-performing team, I love you, I want to be a friend, but if we don't do this, we're never going to win. All right? And you're probably not going to be here. That's an authentic conversation. All right? So you're always treading the fine line between relationships and standards and relationships and standards as you go through your day, your week, your year, et cetera, et cetera.
How did you create the environment to get true, authentic feedback back to yourself because I would imagine there would be people could be intimidated to give you the true feedback based off how they could be, affected by it.
Yeah, again, setting up a system. You had a system to start in Sydney, and the feedback was, Roosy said out the front, the leaders are going to give you feedback. What are you doing well? What do you need to do? So you got to set up your system around feedback. We did it with the players. We did it with the coaches. The coaches will get feedback. You got to have a system of feedback. You can't just expect it to happen. Feedback's a learned skill. But then when it does happen, then Stewie Max will walk in my office and say, mate, you have 3/4 time speech, mate. You're completely off tap. And I said, oh, really? Was I? Yeah. Do I need to follow up with the players? Mate, I've addressed it. Well, let me know. But you have to set up a system of feedback, and then you get real-time feedback, little and often conversations. But first of all, you have to set up a system where the coach gets the feedback. The captain gets the feedback. The leadership group gets the feedback. The players get the feedback. And then hopefully everyone understands it. In real time, we give and receive feedback. And a lot of it's positive. I think this notion of, particularly in footy clubs, a lot of it's giving positive feedback, not just do this better, do this better, do this better. A lot of positive feedback around good footy clubs.
Did the players drive, whether it was positive or negative or constructive, the feedback within their group during, say, film reviews or just reviews in general? Because I know that's quite popular from what the Storm have done, from what I've heard.
Yeah, Sydney did it really quickly. Melbourne probably struggled a bit because we had to educate the leaders much more in Melbourne. So it's probably more the coaches doing it. And Sydney, definitely the players took control, a lot of meetings. But in Melbourne, it was probably the I tell model a bit more. This is what I want. This is what we need. What does that look like? And a lot of questions, how did you feel in that situation? How can we help you? But certainly from the Sydney point of view, was a lot of the players taking responsibility.
Yeah. So a little bit of context, I met Roosy through his son's business mentorship group called Momentum through one of my friends, Blake, that runs it with him. And Roosy talked lots about personality profiling. And I'm just curious, Roosy, did you actually use that within the player system as well and coaches?
When I was playing, we didn't do it, which I wish we had. And when I was coaching Sydney, no. But by the time I got to Melbourne, we did a bit of profiling, which was great. And Gee, it's so valuable, understanding yourself and understanding your others. It's an incredible tool. And I know it's one that the corporates absolutely love. It's definitely done more in football clubs now. It's incredibly important, because everyone is different. You got a set of standards, which everyone adheres to, but how do we make player X, not make them, how do we engage player X compared to player Y? Adam Goods is a different personality to Leo Barry. He's a different personality to Brett Kirk and Stuart Maxfield. So understanding yourself and understanding others and understanding the team dynamic is incredibly important.
Can you elaborate in terms of the one that you use and why you use it and what it gives you?
Yeah, so we use the Insights Discovery at Performance by Design. It gives a really good story around it. It's easy to tell. It's colours, yellow, blue, red, green. We use birds as well. So green is really the dove, so calming. Yellow is sort of the peacock, the salesperson. Blue is analytical, the owl, and red is the eagle, just getting stuff done. But it's how you work collectively. How do you communicate with a blue compared to a red? How do you communicate with a yellow compared to a green, et cetera, et cetera? So we do a whole workshop on what it looks like. And as I said, the corporate world loves it. And most of the time they said, now I know why I don't get along with Roosy. I've just been telling him what to do. I should be giving him way more information. Then I should be going to his office and saying, have you got all the information I gave you? Can we set up a time to meet? Yep. Let's meet Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock. Whereas, Blake just needs, coffee, a bit of BS because he wants to get on with stuff but he wants to be social, whatever it might look like. So it's understanding what makes people tick is really, really important.
Do you find, this is just a curious question I have, do you find with personality tests, the ego gives you a false result, or is it representative of who they are at that time?
Well, I mean, the pressure comes on. That's probably where often the ego comes into it as well. But we talk about the conscious and the so I probably don't want to go into too much detail around the profile because we could be on for another hour. But think about it from the point of view of the wedding photos. So on the wedding photo is your conscious. Okay, we've just had the wedding. We're on the steps of everyone's pristine, absolutely pristine. So that's who you think you should be, or people want you to be. The unconscious profile is midnight that night. Some have still got their hair done, the tie done up, and some are messy, some are done. That's your unconscious. That's how you behave when no one is watching you. All right. So in terms of your profile, sometimes it can be generated by pressure, which, as I talked about, or it can be generated by your role. But the great thing is you have a great understanding of who you are. And if that's different to who you want to be, then you're going to say, well, I need to be more conscious of these behaviors and being conscious of how I want to act in this situation.
I heard a great quote around the ego. It's like your personality is what your ego wants the world to see.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's really complex, and that's probably why we don't spend enough time on understanding ourselves and understanding others, because it is quite complex under pressure, in certain roles, certain times, with people we like. We tend to act slightly differently because we're comfortable. We're both the same personality. Often we see two reds having a conversation and they're really verbose and really direct, but the green's sitting there going, geez, why are they arguing? The two reds are going, well, we weren't arguing, we're just having a conversation. So it is a really complex system in place when you look at profiling.
Do you find, diving deep into the personality profiles, that in the corporate world, they may find things hard to take on board because they maybe could get offended by what's said more easier, in terms of they don't have that kind of hard shell to deal with criticism?
Yeah, well, what we want to make clear, there's no such thing as a bad profile. So, but to be a good leader, you have to get out of your dominant color. You have to get in all the other colors. All right, that's where it becomes challenging. All right, you can be a red leader, a yellow leader, green leader, blue leader, but you have to get out of those colors and get into all the other colors. And if you can't do that, in my opinion, you're not going to be a good leader. So that's when it becomes challenging. Not necessarily what your profile is, but your ability to get out of your dominant color and into your non-dominant energies, which you have to do to be a good leader.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying to be a good leader, you need to not take on what your dominant trait is, but to potentially take on other people's traits so then they can resonate with what you're saying?
Well, to get people to do what the team wants them to do, okay, you've got your natural dominant energy, but at times you're going to have to be more empathetic, more calm if you're a red. At times as a green, you're going to have to be more dominant. You're going to have to say, this is what I want you to do. At times as a yellow, you're going to have to be more analytical. And you have to look at P&L. At times as a blue, you're going to have to be more reactive and do things quicker. So you just have to get out of your dominant energy to be a great leader. So there's no bad profile, but to be a great leader, you have to be in all the other colors, every color in certain times of the week, certain times of the day, certain times of, the situation that you're in. Even within a meeting, you have to understand that person needs to be spoken to calmer. That person I can be more direct with.
In terms of using your work in the corporate world, do you tend to focus on the people at the top of the structure or the org chart, and then that gets fed down? Or do you kind of try and work with people in mid-tier who are actually having to do the specific tasks of the job?
Yeah, well, ideal if we can work with exec teams the best, because our motto is to create role model leaders, that understand their behaviors. So it's really important, leadership is about action. It's about doing. So if we can get a culture code for the leadership team, the exec team, and then the more layers we work within the organization, 100% the better. The more people, the way to numbers, you act your way into the system, you act your way out of the system, and the more people you've got rowing the boat in the right direction. But it has to start with your role model leaders. It has to start with your exec team, your CEO, your coach, your captain, whatever it is. And they've got to be exemplifying it first in that team, and then we can build it down and underneath. But the more people we get involved, absolutely, the more impact that it has.
Is there a common theme around what corporate execs are bringing you in for in terms of the problem that they need help with?
Probably the lack of understanding of team. Because what happens typically when we get to the exec teams, they're all technically really good at what they do, really technically good at marketing, really technically good at IT, technically good at sales. But then all of a sudden they're asked to stop doing, which is really hard for executives because they've been doing their whole lives, and work collectively, understand the collective goal of the company, not just the marketing team, not just the IT team. Okay, so probably the themes around team, the themes around, what is leadership? Leadership is often about inaction, not doing. And that becomes really difficult for execs that have just been doing stuff all their lives. All right. What is empowerment? I've got to allow my team to work but it's fundamentally building a culture code, doing the profiling, understanding ourselves, understanding others, building really strong relationships, and then setting a framework around having open and honest conversations.
Are your 3 other business partners? Is that right?
Three directors, and then we've got some staff as well.
Yep. Are they from a sporting background as well?
Jared Murphy worked with Geelong Footy Club and took them to premierships, which is really good. Jared Murphy mentored Emil, who was running a business in Canada, and heard of Jared, flew him over. And then Emil and Warren are related. Emil ran the program for Warren when he was at a big marketing company and completely transformed his business. So Emil and Warren pulled us all together about 4 or 5 years ago. So some business background, some sporting background, and then collectively we sort of work together. But most of our work's in the corporate space.
In a specific industry, or is it across the board?
No, it's across the board. It's really not. It's more leadership driven. If we got a CEO that wants to empower their staff, wants to be clear on their values, wants to build strong relationships, wants to understand self and others, it's really cool when we work with those CEOs and those executives.
So when you work with people on an individual basis, how do you, what are the skill sets you give them, or the advice around trying to lead themselves better? Because I imagine you get that a lot.
Individually?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. Again, concepts. But firstly, understanding what their values are, and then asking some people, that's a really good starting point. What do you want to be as a leader? How do you want to be perceived? I want to be honest. I want to be passionate. I want to be driven. All right. Ask people, is that how they see you? And then what does that look like? What does passionate really look like? What does driven really look like? And then under that, you mightn't look what you see. Well, I work 14 hours a day. Was that really what you want? Well, no, not really. Okay, well, your actions, that's what they're seeing. So clearly articulating and getting in their head what their actions are showing people of what their values are. Right. And then we build from there. Okay. Is that what you want to be? If it is, let's keep going down that path. If it's not, and you want to be more supportive, then you're going to have to empower people. You're going to have to ask better questions. You're going to have to listen more. You're going to have to help more people, because you can't be supportive and don't give a shit about anyone. It just doesn't work like that. So we build the framework, and then we just have real life conversations around what's happening at work. What happened this week? I blew up at someone. Why? Because I'm a red, and they were yellow, they were green. And well, what did they expect? I should have built better relationships. Yes, 100%. Okay, so you knew what was going to happen. Yeah, I did. Under pressure. Okay, how did that work? No, it didn't work well. Great example. So we have conversations around that. So were you supportive? No, I wasn't. Okay. Do you want to be supportive? Yes, I do.
Yeah, that's brilliant. One of the, I guess, the cues or the tasks I get people that I work with to do is I always ask them to jot down people that they admire or look up to. And I ask them, what do those people take responsibility for in their life?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
and then we start building out. Do you do those actions every day, or do you not? And then trying to create not necessarily new habits, but it's about creating new behaviors.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. And that, again, getting back to the point before, every action is a vote for the person you want to be. And it's a really good way. Like you, as you said, you and I met through the Momentum Boys, through Blake, Janara and Dylan. They did a really good workshop on habits and actions. Write down what you did today, and then you'll find out what you value. I always say this to people all the time, and I've said this to Dylan and Tyler, and I'll say this to you. If I gave you $1 million, what are you going to spend it on? You're not going to spend it on something you don't want or you hate. It's a really good way to see what people's values are. Are you going to spend on a family holiday? That's I value my family. Are you going to spend it on a car? Are you going to spend it on your dog, your cat, a new house or security? And it's the same as what you're saying, exactly what you're talking about. If you will spend your money, you will spend your time and your energy in things that you value. So you can't do an audit at the end of the week. Exactly right. I admire that person because they did this for me. Well, are you doing that for someone else? No, shit, I'm not. I'm rude. I'm obnoxious. I talk down to people. But the person I admired asked questions, was interested in my family, took me out to coffee once a week. I'm the complete opposite. It's amazing when you do that audit and you'll get an idea of are you the leader you wish you had, which is exactly what you're talking about. That's the way we put it, performance by design. Are you the leader you wish you had? All right, write down the things that good leaders did and write down the things that bad leaders did, and then audit yourself against them.
Yeah, I really loved what the Momentum crew did around the value system. Like, it really started to open my eyes in terms of how I was living against my values in pro sport randomly, even though my whole life I wanted to work in pro sport. As soon as I had kids, my whole value system changed. Now understanding what my values are, I was never going to be able to last in pro sport for much longer because I had new value system and I needed to live in I guess alignment to those, which is kind of what I'm doing now with my work. And yeah, it's definitely once you.
I think you're right. I think it's interesting when we do it. Like people, and this is where it becomes really challenging. Sorry, I'm just going to plug my computer in. This is where it becomes challenging because when people look at their values, often they find they're in the wrong position, or this is even more challenging, the wrong friend group, wrong marriage, wrong, whatever it might be. That's when it becomes really challenging. And that's exactly what you said. Suddenly you've looked at your values and you've gone, I can't do this if I want to be that. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, 100%. In terms of 2005, you won Father of the Year, didn't you? Australian Father of the Year.
2008, yeah, 2008, I think it was, yeah.
Something that my wife would probably try and nominate me for, hopefully.
Yeah, look, I mean, that was super proud. I mean, just, yeah, look, and it's funny because what you're talking about before is the values. And, you know, and what the term I don't like is work-life balance, because it's life balance. It's your life. You know, like you touched on it before, like I'm not a coach just when I'm at Sydney Swans or Melbourne Footy Club. I'm a coach when I walk home. I'm a father when I'm at the footy club, and I'm a husband, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, when I started coaching Sydney, we spoke about it as a family. Do we want to coach the Sydney Swans? You know, and that allowed me to live my values while I was doing a really, you know, difficult job and a stressful job, because, you know, my family was supportive. I was supportive of them. And then we set clear boundaries and guidelines around how we were going to do that. You know, for instance, I'd take the boys every Thursday morning. I'd take the boys, have brekkie, drop them off at Lara. So I set for boundaries. I mean, clearly there's things that the players couldn't, the kids couldn't do. They couldn't come in the coach's box. They couldn't run on the ground when the games were on. But, you know, the ability to navigate life around your values is really, really important.
What were the key skills that you instilled in your kids early on? Because they would have grown up obviously in the limelight, knowing that their dad was, I guess, quote unquote famous. He was kind of, people knew who he was. What did you try and do to keep them grounded?
I think the thing, again, I was lucky in that they were exposed to really good people, you know, so I probably didn't fully understand that at the time. You know, by creating a great environment at Sydney for Sydney to win premierships, it also created a great environment for my kids. Like that was probably didn't strike me until the boys started telling stories around how they were in the rooms after the game and how they were talking to, you know, the players and how much input they had. And Dylan talks about it now in his mentoring roles and with Momentum and his Prince King program. So I think that was really important, that it's the flow-on effect. It's your life is there for everyone to see. You know, it's not, I walk in the Sydney Swans, I'm going to act differently. So when I was around the Swans players, I was probably the same as when I was at home. You know, setting standards for my boys. You know, we're eating healthy, running, doing exercise, supporting my kids in sport. As I supported, you know, Stewie Maxfield in the captaincy, I tried to support my boys. You know, sometimes I was probably overcritical of them, but trying to set standards that they could adhere to, the same as I did. And I talk about this all the time. The number I coached my boys' footy teams, the number of times that I'd laugh after I'd walk back from the huddle in the under-13s coaching Dylan or Tyler, and I'd literally given the same speech at that break that I'd given the night before coaching the Swans. And I literally pissed myself laughing. I go, that's hilarious. I've literally spoken the same way to the boys, these 12-year-old boys, as I did to the Swans players the night before. So I think that was probably the main thing, just to be authentic, who you are. It doesn't matter what environment you're in, be the person you want to be.
How did you make sure that there was no pressure on them to, I guess, quote unquote, succeed to the level that you were at, in terms of just to be themselves and to not worry about that side of things? Because the reason why I say that, sorry, is because I know your kids are both very grounded. So it's just interesting how they've got to that point.
Yeah, look, I'm really proud of them. I think, again, surrounding themselves with good people. Yeah, both went to good schools. They had really good peer groups, really good friends. And we allowed them to do what we wanted to do. I mean, it was probably harder for them, you know, playing footy and having the dad that was coaching the Swans. And, yeah, it's probably something that I couldn't understand as much, you know, because it was hard at times. But, Tammy's a wonderful person. Having an incredible mother was, really, really important, really supportive, really grounded. Travel was a big part. I think the fact that we got out of Australia a lot and travelled overseas, that was huge. Really providing him with a great opportunity. I think travel is one of the most underrated things you can do for your kids. Now some of it can be quite expensive, but going to Africa and going to the slums, in the Kavika slums in Kenya, what an incredible experience for the boys to go to a school that had wooden tables and metal sheets, and then to go out in the African jungle and see lions and, elephants and things like that. No Wi-Fi, no nothing, and so those experiences were incredibly invaluable for them to understand. Being on a basketball trip for Cranbrook, which Cranbrook was great, but going to traveling around America and going to Manhattan and playing in different environments, and so all those experiences were incredibly important.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. And did you have clear boundaries between coaching life and home life? In terms of, say, when you finish work, you literally did not do any other work, and coaches knew that, or you were always open to, because I know that's so demanding being the head coach, you always got people trying to get information from you, or did you have clear boundaries in terms of how you...
Yeah, no, pretty clear boundaries. Yeah, I think, I think that getting back to being present, when I was home, I was present. The good thing about the computer age is you could pick up the computer once the boys go to bed and watch some vision. But pretty much, my staff knew not to contact me after 6 o'clock at night unless there was something urgent. They knew the time. So routine is really important. Where the times are accessible, where the times are not accessible. So setting a routine, I found, was incredibly important, and being present. When you it's really hard at times. When you're in a footy club environment and the high pressure environment with the media. But they're really important things to try and achieve.
I'd imagine too, having your wife as a mindfulness coach would make things, I guess, make them able to empathise with what's going on in their life a lot easier as well. Yeah,
I mean, we meditated pretty much every day, and she's an academic, did a PhD and did a dissertation on meditation. So, and having conversations and she holding me accountable and having really good home life and good family, good friends, as I said, good footy club. It's, it's a whole environment, really. Again, it gets back to the good organisation. No one thing creates, good parents, good kids, good people. It's leaning on mentors and friends and family and extended family and surrounding yourself with really high quality people.
Yeah, the first coach I had at the Tigers, Jason Taylor, his famous quote was that we will never win on the pitch until we win at home.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And again, it's. I remember when my first manager, Damien Smith, I walked in as a 16-year-old. He probably thought I wasn't going to last very long. And one of the first things he told me is, if you're happy off the field, you're going to be a good player on the field. I'm like, and I eventually knew what he was talking about. But it's so important, to get that. And I think, again, we talk to leaders a lot about this in the corporate world. Look after yourself first and foremost. That's not selfish. Be the best version of yourself. If that's meditating in the morning or going for a walk or walking the dog or getting a good night's sleep. And I'm sure you talk a lot about to your execs as well. Your people want you to turn up the best version of yourself. That's your commitment to them to be the best leader. And that becomes really important.
Was the transition hard for you out of sport in terms of being able to still, obviously there's so many highs and lows and that can be quite addictive in sport, a coach or a player. Do you find that was a hard transition for you, or you had the right mental things in place to make that transition easy?
Yeah, firstly, as a player, we probably going overseas, we'd always said I was going to go and live with Tammy and his family. So I think that was really good, having a break, a clean break, and just getting away from the country. So then, and I was finished as a player, but then getting around, doing some research. So that was really important. And then the break from coaching, I never saw myself as a career coach. I always felt that's a dangerous term. Now that's not to say you can't coach for 20 or 30 years, but career coach, like, it means that I'm going to do anything I possibly can to bite, scratch, and hang on to be a coach. No, if you're no good at it, go and do something else, So I had this philosophy that I wanted to coach for about 7 or 8 years, and it turned out 8.5 at Sydney. And then at Melbourne, I got brought back knowing I was going to do a succession plan. It was only going to be 3 years. So I think planning and understanding and self-awareness, I think, is a really good part of, really underrated part of being a good leader. Knowing what you're good at, knowing what you're not good at, and understanding when it's time to move on.
Yep. Yeah. It's, from my experience and from a player, from knowing players, like, being able to finish on your own terms is very, very, I think, important if you're a coach or if you're a player. But there's a lot of baggage that you could hold if you don't get to do that on your terms. So hearing you say that, I definitely do agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. Look, and sometimes it's hard because it's not on your own terms, whether it's an injury or you get cut early or whatever. But again, it gets back to preparation, sort of preparing for the next stage and sort of understanding where you're at and when it might finish, whatever that might be.
Yeah. All right. Finally, big question. How do you want to be remembered?
I don't know. It's an interesting one, isn't it? You know, probably is just someone that did what they said they were going to do and live their doctrine and live their values. You know, I think that would be really good to be remembered as that, and hopefully lifted people up rather than dragging people down, brought energy to things, and helped people become successful. But I really haven't felt a lot about it because often it's people are going to look at you differently. Some people will have different experiences with me than others. But overall, hopefully I've had a positive impact on people's lives.
Well, I guess you can just look back at your track record with the teams you've worked with, and then also, I guess, the family dynamic you've created, because I think the people that surround you the most, and I think they're a good reflection of who you are as a person.
Yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate that.
So where can people find you?
Yeah, so a company, Performance by Design, www.performancebydesign.co. I'm on LinkedIn as well, so I'm really accessible on LinkedIn if people want to get hold of me on LinkedIn also. So, but yeah, look up our website, send us an email if you want a diagnostic or want us to come out and do anything, whether that's one-on-one coaching, whether that's for your company, et cetera, or just get hold of me through LinkedIn.
Awesome. Roosie, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Good on you, mate. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.